You are still watching Kwacha Good Morning Zambia, and I hope you have enjoyed the program so far. Now, in this interview, I'll be chatting to Alice Evans, and she is a researcher from the London School of Economics. She's been in the country for about a year now, doing some research on gender inequality in the country, and we'll find out more about that. But one interesting thing about Alice is that she's actually learned Bemba, and you'll be surprised that she actually speaks deep Bemba more than I can do. So let's just find out. Alice, mwaisen mkwai mwashuka shani
nabuka febuina ngamwe mwabuka shani
awe twabuka fe wino nshishibeka athinki timwaposhako nabantu timwabashibushako
natotela mwashibukeni bonse.
All right, Alice, maybe just to start off, just what have you been doing in the country for this whole year that you've been in here?
Okay, thank you, and thank you for bringing me here. So I was living in Kitwe in the Copperbelt, trying to understand how some people come to support gender equality. And there's a phrase that's becoming increasingly popular in Kitwe, "Namayo kutia bomba inchto shawame." And I was trying to understand how this has come about, because about 60 years ago, in the colonial period, women were sort of encouraged to be housewives. Men would go out and find work, provide for the families, and women were sort of staying at home, looking after the children, and not really having big social circles, and not really being valued by their families or their communities. You know, men were the leaders, men were the politicians, men were providing. And so that sort of meant that women came to be underrated. But with worsening economic insecurity in the 1980s and 1990s, families increasingly have supported women going out into the labour force and girls getting an education. And as women go out and get jobs, fighting to provide for their families, they've increasingly become appreciated and valued by their families, who see, you know, supporting each other and listening to each other and discussing problems as a team as advantageous. You know, people talk about ukubombela pamo, no, ukwafuana. So it's not really about gender equality as women being in a fight with men or women trying to take over from men, but more about, you know, what can we do to learn from each other and trying to help each other dealing with a difficult situation of poverty in the Copperbelt. So that was one thing, looking about the history of people's lives. And I did this through interviewing about 250 people, a massive range of people, people working in the markets, people working in the mines, older people, younger people, teachers, politicians. And I lived with these families. So I was living for a long time, 6 months in Butchie with the PF councillor there. I was also living in Nkana East, all sorts of different families to try and understand more about their lives. And it wasn't just interviewing someone for an hour quickly, but more like, you know, spending many, many months in Ichisankano, Chisokoni market, and listening to people's lives and understanding their perspectives and how people change their minds about women.
One of the institutions that you actually undertook your research is in schools. Actually, just tell us some of your findings that came out from your experience or your research from there.
Thank you. So I spent about 3 months of my time in 3 different schools. One was a co-educational government school, a single-sex government school, and also a sort of elite private school. And I think 2 things that came out. One was that people who had been in a co-educational school, learning with the opposite sex, came to realise that girls and boys are just as competent as each other. Like when the girl next door, the girl next to you is doing the maths puzzle and she's finishing it quickly, you realise, oh right, yeah, girls can do it, because these people are getting first-hand evidence of gender equality, seeing it for themselves, that girls can achieve in maths. For me, if you wanted to support gender equality in schools, I think we need to shift from a culture of just rote learning, where the teacher is telling us the answers and what we need to do when we write down and we learn, to creating discussion where students are questioning these things. You know, why are these things true? And questioning what's going on. And that would definitely help with that kind of analysis. And then also co-education. That would really help as well.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you'd give us a historical perspective during the colonial, just where the gender equality stems from in the colonial era. And now I'm sure there have been a lot of changes looking at literature, historical perspective, and what you were finding. Just what are the policy implications for your findings?
Right, thank you. So I think the most important thing is that people need first-hand evidence that women can do what men can do, because it is only on the basis of that evidence that people see it as advantageous to support it. So what would be really important is to support women's progress in the labour market. At the moment in Zambia, the employer has to pay for maternity leave. So that kind of discourages the employer from hiring a woman, because the employer knows that he would then have to pay for it out of his own pocket. But in other countries, like in the UK, it's social insurance. So every worker contributes for maternity leave. So the employer himself or herself doesn't actually have to foot the bill for maternity leave. So I think the government could help a lot by creating an enabling social services environment that supports women's entrance and progression within the labour force.
Very interesting findings there and just the implications of policy. Maybe just on a lighter moment, ngati twalandako mwalisambirira echibemba ili mwali mu Zambia. Nishi mwasambiri nishi chalengera ati musambiri echibemba.
Okay. Mukulanda n'abantu nukumfama tontonkanya yabo ichikalamba ukupanga ubuchibusa nukukwata ichichete kalo nukumfana bueno so des fois ukumfwa abantu nukulanga ukwebati nalichindika intambi shabo des fois ukwishiba pala amatontonkanya yabo abantu nga fois ukulanda po amatontonkanya yabo bafwile ukukaka luka no
Oh my God.
Fiance fio bafoya so chawama sananga twalanda muchibemba.
Okay, so bale mipokelera shani nga baise fine bamyufa mulera muchibemba bale mipokelera shani
kukitwe abantu bali basuma sana balintentemba sana fie kukitwe naliishi bikwe sana ngana kuchisankano kuchisokoni mapalo ishinaliandi muchibemba mapalo nani kwataba nandi abani basuma sana debatasha no kutasha.
So no pamulebwelela mo so tamwakaba fuluke tumwabe bakoshani abanenu bonse kukitwa ko mwalebo obo mwalebo mbana bene tumwabe bakoshani
mulishani abanandi nali mifaluka sana nomba kesa umulungule isa kamitandelila.
We wish you the best for the rest of your stay in Zambia.
Thank you.
All right. I mean, Alice is an interesting person to chat with, and just interesting findings from research about gender equality, and especially focusing on the education sector. And also just an interesting aspect about Alice is just her urge to learn the language, just that anthropological approach to her research. She had to learn that language. And I hope when you go to another country and you visit another country, take time to learn their language. This is very encouraging. Well, that's all we had for you in this interview. We take you back to Kwachi Good Morning Zambia in the studio.